Okay, go ahead.
Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non-dogmatic way. Helping Parents Heal affiliate groups welcome everyone regardless of religious or non-religious background and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at all Helping Parents Heal meetings is voluntary. All discussions that take place at affiliate-led meetings are confidential. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Zoom meetings run by Helping Parents Heal leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with our children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone. Oh, we're going to have a great evening tonight. Thank you, Dr. Moody, for being here.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Wait, I need to introduce you though. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Moody because he is absolutely amazing. I must say, he's one of my heroes. I have a few heroes that I have always looked up to, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and I can put Dr. Raymond Moody up there with those two. I'm just so happy to have him here this evening. About Raymond Moody, MD, PhD. In 1975, Dr. Moody coined the term near-death experience in his book, Life After Life. For half a century, he has researched some of life's greatest mysteries. As both a PhD in philosophy and an MD, he has a strong interest in how medical realities intersect with the ineffable realm of philosophy. In Dr. Moody's multiple roles as author, professor, public speaker, and grief counselor, he has heard thousands of accounts of near-death, shared death, and after-death experiences. He never expected that his interest in the afterlife would become such a focus of his life's work, but it has led him to great associations, friendships, and insights. Throughout his 5-decade career, Dr. Moody has explored themes related to the transpersonal aspects of death, dying, and grief. In his book, Glimpses of Eternity, he discusses the phenomena of shared death experiences. Dr. Moody writes about his inquiry into past lives in his book, Coming Back, and shares methods for evoking the dead from ancient Greece to modern times in his book, Reunions. Dr. Moody also has a passion for language, which he shares with his colleagues and co-founder of the Life Afterlife Institute, colleague, Lisa Smart. His PhD in philosophy focused on unintelligibility, and one of his new books, which is the book that we spoke about the last time that we had Dr. Moody on, is called Making Sense of Nonsense, and discusses what nonsense teaches us about consciousness and altered states of being. For years, Dr. Moody has imagined a forum in which leading edge researchers and thinkers could share their most up-to-date investigations into near-death phenomena while drawing upon the wisdom of ancients whose practices and customs clearly recognized a life beyond this one. Dr. Moody will share with each of you and us all he has discovered at the most fascinating frontiers of life and death. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Raymond Moody. Welcome, Dr. Moody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks for everyone watching. And I gotta say, I mean, let's just face it, the circumstances that brought us all here tonight are very sad and tragic. And I should say at the very beginning that I myself lost my first child at the age of 36 hours, which was to me, to us, that was 9 months, right? And this was also the first, my mother and father's first grandchild. And so, I mean, I don't, this is what happened to me. And you can all imagine that was in 1970 when people didn't talk about grief. A wall of silence fell down. I remember this was June of 1970. I remember that in August, 2 months later, I had 2 spells within 2 weeks, during which I felt like I was going to die and in which I wanted to run through the wall. That's the only thing I experienced through that was now as a psychiatrist, I can recognize that as like a hyperventilation spell or a panic attack, right? But there were not even words on this for it. People didn't talk about grief. So for the rest of my life, for example, one thing that's played out in me, and I know a lot of people listening to this relate to, and that is that you are always thereafter worried about your other kids. I mean, I have a constant, I don't know what to call it, worry channel. When I was a kid, there was 3 TV channels, ABC, NBC, and the other one, and in Atlanta. And now there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I just don't know. There's all kinds of channels, like the Bunyan channel or the Arrowhead Collectors channel. Anything you want, I guess, is a channel. So to me, I guess we're all familiar with that multi-channel thing. And so constantly there's a channel of constant worry about my kids. What are they doing? Where are they? Just my 2 wonderful ones. I have 2 grown sons who are on their own, and then 2 wonderful children who were adopted at birth, and both are the moment of birth. We've had ever since, and they are now 23 and 21 and happily living at home. They haven't gotten any of those modern ideas about leaving home like I did when I was 18 and just, hardly ever came back. They are lodged here. And I just thank God for this, right? And so, but even now, it's like if they're gone during the day, Carter goes to work, I worry, So that's one of the ways that this played out in my life and continues to. And, they talk about closure. I just don't like that word closure. It's just so completely artificial. I mean, there is just no such thing as a word people want to impose over, in my opinion. Now, there are so many places we could go with this, folks, and I want to respond to you folks and to, entertain your questions and thoughts. So let me just reflect here about the afterlife question. I was talking with Elizabeth you know, out there in the ether before when we had our little miniature ether. Now we have a bigger ether, but in our little miniature ether we had before, we were talking about, you know, she felt that that talking about my experiences and encounters with the question of life after death would be, you know, helpful. And I, you know, yes, and so I always like to talk about that. And one of the first things I want to say about that is that I think that in my 77-year-old opinion, you know, at 77, you're past the age of politeness. I can say all this stuff, right? But it is, I am astonished at the casual way in which some people who sport doctoral degrees in connection with their names just talk about, you know, this question of an afterlife as though it is easy to solve or easy to think about. And I think that when as soon as you start thinking about the question of life after death and how you might prove it, you get into a very profound issue of personal, like professional ethics. And let me explain why. Let's say that I, Raymond Moody, that were to say that based on my research for and looking into this, and as a philosophy professor and psychiatrist and so on, that I conclude that there is that this is proof or evidence of life after death. Okay, now we all know that some people actually take the opinions of people with doctoral degrees seriously, which you tend not to be afflicted about with that very much if you have doctoral degrees yourself. But it is a sad thing. I think that in our society, many people take the opinions of professionals too seriously. Don't you think? I mean, just think about it yourself. A lot of people are, you know, just too awed by the professionals. But in that case, let's suppose that they hear that message that I just delivered as a professional, then they're comforted by it. And so they are relieved in their grieving process because of the loss of a loved one. And now flash forward, let's say that some flaw in my work was detected. You see what I'm saying? Where does that leave the person who took comfort from my work? And the reason I'm saying that here at the very beginning is, don't you think this is a real consideration? We all know the pain of losing a child, you know, and I mean, and I have talked with, you know, been a grief counselor really even before I went to medical school, because people sort of sought solace from the near-death experiences I was exploring. But what I'm getting at is that to me, it seems like professionally a very irresponsible thing and a violation of professional ethics for a professional to make a statement that they have evidence or proof of life after death without being fully aware of that. And therefore, it may sound extraordinarily, you know, brash for me to say that what I want to say is not proof of life after death, but I, Raymond Moody, say that I can show or demonstrate a testable breakthrough in the genuine rational investigation of life after death, which has actually had results now and is on the way. I mean, a whole new way of looking at this.
Could I ask you a question?
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat box from a mom, and I'd like for her
Yeah.
to be reassured. She's saying, I feel connected to my deceased child. Is there
Yeah.
something for this in the idea of life after life?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And what I want to say is that we are in a state now where we can gain genuine enlightenment on this, but it's got to take patience. And so also that even if we can, let's say, prove a rationally proven afterlife, it still hurts it's like people with near-death experiences, and I've talked with thousands of them over the years. One of the things I hear very frequently from people is they say that paradoxically, it makes your grieving process even more acute to have your own your own direct experience of the afterlife. And the reason is this, that you can no longer rationalize. You think of somebody with a religious belief, they might say, well, I'm not going to feel bad about grandma because my religious belief tells me that my grandma's in a wonderful place. People with near-death experiences say, yeah, I know, my grandma's in a wonderful place. I've been there. Trouble is, I miss her. So, see, that's what we're dealing with. And so, the nice thing is, I think we can get enlightenment on the afterlife question with rational considerations, but we have to be careful and to be suspicious of people saying things like, I've got rational proof of an afterlife here. But the news is good. We're on the right track, but just be cautious of listening to people who are too far, just too rash, in my opinion, and their claims.
Dr. Moody, would you say that maybe it's supposed to be that we are not supposed to know everything about the afterlife, and we aren't supposed to maybe understand how wonderful it is, how beautiful it is, because we're supposed to be accomplishing something very important here on earth? And so the ineffable quality that all of these people explain is ineffable because of the fact that we're not supposed to know or be able to explain.
Yes. By the way, I wouldn't say that there's, that we ought not to, or that there's some, sin and trying to know, which obviously that's not the import of your question anyway, but what I get what you're saying is that the setup is such that we're not supposed to know. And I sort of sense that that's the case. You see, in Plato's description of it, which is, we say, oh, Plato, it sounds so dull and hollow and boring and old, but the whole way we think about the afterlife in the West, for example, specifically, the whole Christian theology of the afterlife was predicated specifically on Plato's way of looking at it. I mean, this is all you can find in the theology books. This is how it worked. That he said the way of looking at this. And so how, I don't want to sound too abstract with this, but I say that he was probably right when he said that when we come across from the other, the way he puts it, there's this other dimension from which we come here, okay? And he says that just before we come in here, he said, you can kind of imagine, he says that the way he puts it, it kind of makes it seem like there's a flat screen that you're looking at. And he says that on this screen, there's a guide or a person there, a consultant, I guess, who shows you on that screen all the different, he says, not lives, but patterns of lives. Think about it. There's some sort of selection process, apparently, and these different possibilities are on the screen, and there's some process of selection. And then you go through a process where Plato calls it you drink of the waters of forgetfulness. My Native American daughter, who is a scholar on things Japanese, says that in Japan they have that same thing of something you drink just before you came. You come here and forget all you know. See. And Plato says there's gradations of it. Some just drink a lot of water and they forget everything, but other people just take a few sips, but they can remember. And I think I've seen that, there's some people, there's a kind of leakage with it. And but Plato says in effect that this is a necessary part of the action, right? If we were totally flooded with our past life memories at every instant during our present life, that would be a booming, buzzing confusion, to use William James's words. And so I think that it's to put it in modern psychological terms, what Plato was saying is that there is an event boundary between here and the afterlife. And it's a fancy psychological term for something that everybody watching this has experienced. Because remember, you're sitting in your living room, right? And you think of something you want to get in the kitchen. So you walk into the kitchen to get the item, and what happens? Forget what you came in there for, right? That's an event boundary. And Plato says that's how it works. When you step over from there, you forget. What was that? And some it's leakage. Both of my kids, both of my adopted kids, have just and my wife and I don't talk about life after death, right? We talk about the phone bill, like what's for dinner, the movie this weekend, the homework, we don't. And these kids learned about my book, Life After Life, from looking me up on the internet. Is how they came about it. And we never took them to any kind of religious ceremonies. It's like, I used to be a comedian. What I've said is, we're from down the deep South, and that we're afraid of snakes. So we didn't take them to church. But that's just a joke, of course. But, seriously, they did not get any of this from us. But both of them related very vivid memories of where they were and what they were doing before they came to us, in a way that, I give up. I can't deny what they both said. There you go.
Well, listen, I have some incredible questions here.
Right.
One of them is talking about the fact that you're talking about these boundaries going to the refrigerator, similar to in dreams, when you're waking up from a dream, the same kind of boundaries that exist. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the difference between the dream, are we able to see our loved ones and interact with them when we're dreaming? Is that something that you have researched? Is it something that you believe in?
Well, what I have observed with from talking with thousands of people with near-death experiences is, and I want to put this into the context of when we are thinking metaphorically or trying to imagine the dying, one of the things we often come up with is the image of going to sleep, right? We compare dying to falling asleep, or and also along with that, people often compare near-death experiences, saying, well, that's like a dream. They try to assimilate it to a dream. And on the other hand, what really people say who have had these experiences is that the relationship is actually the opposite. They say, unlike, in the morning when you waking up from a dream, you feel that you're coming back to reality. The images are so bizarre and you're forgetting them, you're trying to hold on to them, but the whole thing is just so bizarre. And so you feel like you're coming back to reality. That's exactly what people with near-death experiences say, except that the dream is this thing we're in now. See, they say that by contrast with the state of consciousness that you're in during a near-death experience, this life we're in is very dreamlike. That's why everybody's interested in this should read Plato's Phaedo and Plato's Republic. And there he talks plainly about this dreamlike quality of this world we're in. And
well, I have another question here. Can I ask you, Randy is asking, and I think this is fascinating. Hello, Dr. Moody. Since you have spent most of your life trying to prove life after life, what are you planning to do once you continue to your next journey, so that those of us here will still know that you're still here, will know that you're right? Are you planning on communicating with us once you get over there?
Well, no, that's an interesting thought, and thank you for the question, Randy. And I got to say that I really, contrary to the way it looks, I haven't really been focused in my life on proving life after death, but more on pointing out to people the great difficulties involved in that task, and to acknowledge that some of the great thinkers of history have sort of pointed out very persuasive reasons for saying that we really can't prove it. Okay, there are inherent limitations. But I have over the years come to a point of view that probably almost seems psychotic, depending, Randy, on how old you are. If you're in your 70s, you will be right with me, but there's a natural developmental thing that occurs with people. I was geriatric psychiatry clinic, like a VIP clinic for a year with the elderly people in town who were too famous to be seen in the front door of the mental health hospital like the rest of us, peons. So like the mayor or the police chief, no way. So, they were there because situational stress or loneliness or whatever. So for a year, I got to be talking to these very eminent and well-known, like accomplished people about their problems. And I just heard repeatedly during that year from these very eloquent people, Raymond, the older I get, the more the impression develops as I look back on my life that it has been a script or a movie or a play or a drama or a novel or a story. People use all kinds of different words, but the idea was the same. And it's the older you get, the more the narrative structure of life is how I think about it. What is your personal identity but your story, right? And so how do all these stories intertwine is what we're asking. It's a very big mystery. We got to acknowledge this, that people with near-death experiences tell me that when they have, they're out of their body, they actually have reunions with their deceased loved ones. And at the same time, the worries that I have, I think about, I am tired of Raymond Moody. Think of it. The young people among you are probably thinking, oh, he must be depressed. The people my age are saying, I get it, because that's how people react. It's like, don't I have an opportunity to move forward in a more, do I have to answer to Raymond Moody for the eternity? I just hate that idea. I just hope there's something, that more unfolding than that.
Now,
And
could I ask you something in terms of the script, or, everyone's talked to you about the fact that it was just almost written a movie or something like that? We have somebody asking, Teresa's asking, do you believe in soul groups and soul plans? Is that something that you agree with, or maybe you could just talk a little bit about that?
I really haven't gotten that far. I don't know where I am related to this. Is I'm thinking David Hume, who was renowned as one of the great skeptics. He lived from 1711 to 1776. Was just, he was just scoffed about the whole notion of an afterlife. But in his writing about the question of life after death, he said, it seemed to him that the only sort of afterlife that a rational person could entertain would be the idea of reincarnation. And that may be because he was a historian and he understood the he understood the role of narrative and story in human civilization and thinking. So that was part of it. But it's very true, that is how narrative is so closely interwoven. And I think that the questions are kind of irresolvable. I saw there on the screen somebody asking about, do I believe in the afterlife? And I really just I've got to acknowledge in advance that this may sound evasive, right? But it's accurate. It's as accurate as I could get it. And that is that, number one, always in thinking about the near-death experience, say, is it the oxygen deprivation to the brain? Okay, well, there is a philosophical problem with that from the very beginning, and it's called epiphenomenalism. But I'm not even going to get into that. But let's go back to that sort of assumption that many people have, that this may be the oxygen deprivation to the brain. The trouble with that, and I saw this from even at my first year in medical school, one of my own professors told me about her identical experience to what we call a near-death experience, but it occurred to her not when she herself was close to death and having oxygen deprivation to her brain, but rather when she was resuscitating her own mother. And this is called the shared death experience. these occur all the time, and they are identical in content with near-death experiences. So if the bystanders who are not ill or injured have the same experience than people who are resuscitated and brought back, then obviously some other factor is involved in addition to, or rather than that oxygen. That, and so to me, all of these things, where I have come to it is that I just give up, right? It's as counterintuitive as the notion of an afterlife still is to somebody who was not raised religious. I didn't even realize until I was 18 years old that anybody took the notion of an afterlife seriously. My only contact with it was in cartoons where the angels and stuff. I thought it was just like a topic of humor or a Jack Benny movie I saw. So, and that's still very counterintuitive to me, right? But I don't know what else to say. I give up, for example. And this is a very personal thing, but you can all translate into your own perspective. But I am an addict in exercise. I have withdrawal symptoms if I miss even a single day of my walk, right? And many people know these feelings, and that's all. Now, I asked myself, let's suppose, heaven forbid, I hate even to say these words, but let's suppose I broke my foot. Okay, oh, just a horrible thought. Well, now, I have a friend that many of you may know of him. His name is Anthony Chicoria. He is a PhD in physiology and also a MD and a professor of orthopedic surgery at NYU. Anthony was struck in the neck by a bolt of lightning, underwent a cardiac arrest, had this profound near-death experience back in the 90s at some point with all these amazing things. I mean, I have my wonderful friend, Eben Alexander, who was a neurosurgeon who had this horrendous infection, which he amazingly survived and had this experience. I mean, I could go on and on telling you the doctor friends I have, the medical doctor friends, physicians that I have, friends I have, who've had these near-death experiences and who unanimously tell me their judgment is, yeah, this is real, not just real like this thing I'm in now, but more real than this, more real than real. So then I put that against, see, it's like, would I go to Anthony Chicoria to fix my foot? And I say, absolutely, I would, see. So there is to me, would be a huge disconnect. And on the one case, trusting my friend's medical judgment completely to where I'd submit my life to them if I had to, heaven forbid. And then at the same time, at the same time, how would I reconcile that with failure to, kind of take seriously their unanimous judgment that this voyage into another world they had was a reality. So but there are other things as well too, but I give up. There is an afterlife. At the same time, I wouldn't try to persuade any of this, of you, of everybody, you have to go through your own process with this. And the worst thing would be to accept by trusting somebody with a doctoral degree, such as Raymond Moody, I mean, you got to go through your own process. But, and the process that I went through with this has been very rigorous because, and I'm not saying patting myself on the back by saying that, but I have always wanted to know what is. I want to know what is. Some people seem to want to know that there is life after death. I want to know what is. Right? If you try to know that something in particular, that really distorts your mental process. But the mental processes I've been through, I just want to figure out what is, and I've gotten to the point where I give up the only thing I can say, and I still kind of stutter when I say it is, to my astonishment, I gather there's an afterlife. And also that it's very, I mean, it's impossible for us to put it into words yet in 2022.
That's wonderful, though. It's beautiful that you have come to that conclusion, that you can't come to any other conclusion and
Well,
come to a
yeah.
study. I have a question that's kind of personal from one of our affiliate leaders. Her name is Dolores, and I would like to hear what you have to say about this. She's saying, Dr. Moody, do you feel you've had communication or connection with your daughter who passed in 1970? Is that something that you?
That was a son who passed in
Son, sorry.
1970.
Yes, son.
But no, it maybe, I don't know. There was one thing a few years after he died. Let's see, that was about 6 years later. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. And I just, you wonder so much about the status of any of us. I mean, it's like I said, it's a kind of horrendous prospect for me to have to think of being Raymond Moody for eternity, going on and on. I mean, don't we get a break, like a change of identity or something, to get through an identity thought? Go step into the identity theater there, Raymond, and you get changed into somebody else. At least, give me a chance. But then you wonder about, well, then how does it all stick together? Assuming that I'm, that we've all had past lives. How do all those past lives hang together? It's, we can't use the concept of ordinary thought, really. I mean, but the closest model I can think of is like the notion that you learned about maybe in high school in English literature about the frame narrative or the framing device, like in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. There's one story of the pilgrims going along to Canterbury is one story. These people are walking along to go, but in the process to entertain themselves as they walk, they decide to tell stories. And so there's the miller and the baker and wife of Bath and all, they tell these different stories which make up the Canterbury Tales. And that's a frame narrative, like the Boccaccio's Decameron worked the same way. People are out in a villa to avoid the plague, and they tell the stories and that's the frame narrative. Well, what about, it's like there's some overall frame narrative that holds all these lives that I or you or anybody else has purportedly lived? Or is there some other mode of consciousness or being beyond the narrative level of consciousness at that next level up? And this, and this really is, it's hard to conceptualize, and it's put also into stark relief about that way, about the conceptual difficulty of it, with the plain fact that so many people seem to have experiences where they step over to some other framework of existence. You know, I mean, how can you deny that? I just, you know, walkers between worlds. I mean, people who work in hospices. I mean, I know people who just kind of, I was really impressed in psychiatric residency. I worked in a state mental hospital, and when you would be on call, you would be called for the far back wards where people were kept who were, you know, I mean, it just, I don't even want to talk about it, just, you know, just like with horrendous deformities and all. And what I would find out when I would be called to these wards in the middle of the night where these people were kept by attendants, that these people who were working in these back wards were almost like beings of light. I know it doesn't make any sense, but these people were just so completely dedicated that, I mean, they were always just kind of beaming when you went back there to write whatever order they wanted, the nurses wanted or whatever. But, you know, you just, in dealing with people who are in extremists, you have some pretty remarkable, as I did as a forensic psychiatrist, dealing with the, you know, the kind of people you read about in the National Enquirer who've done these utterly horrendous, horrible things, you know, but then, you know, they're human beings. You have a relationship with people who've done these just nightmarish things. So, you know, life is just so fascinating. I mean, it's just this, I'm just so happy that I've had this career in learning, and that one of the areas I've learned about is this whole thing of what happens to us at death, and also to some degree trying to help others, you know, to deal with these things that it's impossible for any of us to deal with, is the, you know, that's the fact, isn't it? And yet, you know, it's a matter of put foot A forward, you know, and then stop. Now put foot B forward. Now put foot A forward. But that's my game plan. When, you know, I've been there many times where you just have to do it just sort of second by second almost. But then in the end, it all comes out okay. See, that's what I'm saying. People with these near-death experiences say that in the end, you see everything you've ever done in this vision, you see it from the perspective, not just of yourself, but of the other people involved. And that it all kinds of comes out. Hey, this is neat. This is what I learned and such. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Tell me, do you think that Anna is saying, do you believe that you're going to be greeted by your loved ones in the afterlife? Is that something that you believe in?
You know, first of all, this sounds so evasive, but really, I mean, this really helps a lot if you don't think of it in terms of that idea of belief. That's kind of a manufactured thing.
Right.
And what people seem about it, they mean is something fixed in themselves that they've internalized or something. I can't say this is a belief. This is just more a matter of astonished observation, is what I hear from people, is and that what I imagine that will happen to me based on what I've heard thousands of people is that as you pass over, you encounter who are recognizably people that you had a relationship with in your life, but who are not in physical form. And people say there is no words, you can't describe it, but they say that it's nonetheless, it's kind of a form. You see a form there. And that, but the contact is more like presence, like you have the remembrances and so on. I had this wonderful friend, Vi, who was describing to me how when she went down this tunnel and she came out into this bright place and she saw her deceased relatives there, among whom was her mother. But in the presence of her mother, with the mother was an infant. Right? Vi actually saw this infant. And she said that when she went up to this infant, I can show you Vi's gestures exactly. She said, you've got to imagine that she realized this doesn't make any sense, but she says, imagine that it's like this, that we are composed as sort of like of layers of cellophane, right? So she saw this infant, and she said, as she approached this infant, she said it was something like he would be like, and that she saw at that point a mature person, not in who said, not in words, but I am your brother, which was a surprise to her, because all she knew was she was the youngest of three sisters. Okay, all of whom I knew, by the way, and I knew her father as well. And so when Vi got back, she told her father this, and I talked to her father. I know, I mean, I knew this family. And so he was astonished. She said, it's exactly like I said. And he said that was back in the 30s. That was the first child. It was a boy, and it only lived 2 or 3 days. And so in that period of time, the whole ethos of the way people handle things like that, they didn't tell the subsequent children because it would be too upsetting or disturbing or whatever. So Vi's father told me, he said, yeah, it happened just like she said, but he said, we just didn't want to tell the girls, so we just always kept it to ourselves. But there were other things like that. See, so I anticipate that I will experience these things, and I also anticipate that even though I've heard thousands of cases of it, that I nonetheless will be astonished and surprised by it, just like everybody else.
Well, I have something that was written by Lisa Arnold that's just so beautiful, and I just want to read it to you. I often feel I am watching myself live this human existence. This alone reminds me I am always the actor behind the human role I am playing in this play called life. This perspective feels shared with my son, her son passed, Derek. It's like a knowing that I am multidimensional and cannot be contained fully in a body. I believe I exist with my son from this point of view, only I can't yet remember it. Yet I feel the familiarity of just having spent time with him. So it's almost as though maybe she is spending time with him when she goes to sleep and she's dreaming, but doesn't necessarily remember it. But I think that follows along with what you're talking about, playing a role here when we're here. Um, do you have any thoughts on that? I have another really good question too that I want to ask before we run out of time, and I'm afraid we're going to run out.
Yeah, I just think it's like we can't even imagine this system we're in, but it's like I gather that you will you'll sort of bump into these people again, and it's like it's one analogy I've heard, by the way, that I hear from some, I don't want to use names here, but from various great entertainers and performers and so on. I remember a woman in 1976 or 77 who was a very internationally renowned performer, right? And it's funny because I had no idea who she was, which was just delightful for her. She was so delighted. And I know that feeling. It's so nice to meet somebody who doesn't know you from your work, right? So, but we had a great time, and she was a fine arts performer, which is, Gene Autry and Elvis were about my limit. But she was very delightful, and she invited me to lunch to talk about her near-death experience. But she was saying in the situation that there was this one role that she was very famous for, right? And she was kind of identified. And she was describing to me that night that she walked off the stage after being associated with this role for, years or however long time. So she walked out, and she said she's talking about that feeling she had when she walked off the stage after playing that role that last time. And then she sort of flashed forward. She said, and then Raymond, like several years later, she had this near-death experience, and she said, Raymond, the closest analogy I've had in my life that I could use to explain how my near-death experience felt was that night after I walked off the stage after playing that role for the last time. And I've heard other actors and actresses make that same point in a very similar sort of way of describing it. Yeah.
Fascinating. Allison is asking, do you think that the awakening to the afterlife and the collective consciousness is part of a divine plan? Do you think that this is something that will happen because it's supposed to happen?
Well, I don't want to sound delusional or anything, right? But at the same time, I just, what I think is that we are, yes, in a situation where lots of people could wake up to a whole new level of thinking about not just life after death and near-death experiences, but a whole raft of other stuff as well. Because, see, the situation we're in was very wonderfully described by the great David Hume, who said, and if you think these words through as I say them, you'll see he was right. By the mere light of reason, it seems difficult to prove the immortality of the soul. Now, there's an understatement. Right? But then he goes on to say, some new species of logic is requisite for that purpose, and some new faculties of the mind, that they may enable us to comprehend that logic. And he was probably saying it meaning that it can't be. But what he says is accurate. The logic we use is inadequate to the purpose, and our minds aren't able to comprehend it. But what I want to hereby claim is that you can solve that. And again, I mean, I don't like, I'm so embarrassed to have to say, I mean, I have this book, I'm not trying to sell the book. And the book is not like a kind of page turner exactly. It's the contents of a university course I developed over many years. But what you can do with this is you can actually reformat your mind so that you can think about near-death experiences and life after death and a whole bunch of other stuff in a whole new way. And so I am very confident that we're on the verge of whole new ways of looking at this. And I just feel so much for the folks who are, you know, grieving the loss of a loved one. I think it's beyond my ability to heal all this great pain that I feel myself and I see all around me. I mean, you know, it's just, these are things that are just so hard to ever get over, maybe impossible to get over. Why would I say that it's, you know, I mean, I'm not embarrassed to say that my process of the loss of my son in 1970 is never, it's what, that's how long, 52 years ago now, is it? But it's still, it's not that, the way I think of it is this. If you can you see that circle?
Yes.
You can
Yes.
see the circle. If that that circle in 1970 represents me in 1970, if you see what I mean. That circle is the whole of my consciousness and my being and my knowledge and everything. It was like all of a sudden there was like an eclipse where a darkness, which I could not even name or recognize, came over me, right? And the whole thing was filled up, but I had no knowledge of what it was. A darkness, people didn't talk about death, right? So you can see what happened. Now in 2022, if you ask me what that grief is like, I say, right, except now it's worse because now he would be in the first grade. Now he would be in high school. Now he would be getting married. You see, at each point, there's a little additional loss, right? The difference now in 2022 is that this is me. You see that? It's like that. It is the same, the grief, and even worse than at first, but it's partly because of that grief, myself or my consciousness has grown up so that it occupies a lesser percentage of my total conscious being.
Beautifully said. I understand that. And everyone's saying perfectly said, perfect. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Moody. And
Thank you, folks.
I just feel so grateful every time that we're able to spend time with you. You're such a wealth of knowledge, and I know that your family wants you back, and it's very late there. So what we always do at the end of these meetings is, first of all, ask if you'd like to say any closing words, which you're welcome to, but we also ask everyone to say goodbye to you. So did you have anything that you'd like to say before we close?
Well, just honest to goodness, thank you very much for having me tonight. And also, I mean, just want to reemphasize, I mean, it may seem an impossible dream, but we are now on the verge of totally new ways of looking at this. There is genuine rational proof of genuine rational inquiry into the afterlife is completely possible. It's going to be highly counterintuitive. We got to do it together. It's got to be collective, but it's perfectly possible. Yeah. So
Perfect.
thanks.
Thank you so
Yes, thank you, Dr. Moody. What a great evening. Thank you.
So
Great.
thank you. And if everyone would like
you.
to say
Thank you. Good night, all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Night,
so
everyone.
much.
Thank you
So
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Elizabeth and Irene too.
Thank you.
Good
Good
night.
night, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you. Bye.
you.
Wonderful, Dr. Moody.
Thank you all
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Right.